My uncle once told my parents, he's too soft to survive in this world. When he got arrested for fraud, I was the legal consultant assigned to decide his bail. I told the judge, he's a danger to society, and he thinks soft people can't survive. Growing up, I always heard the same phrase from my uncle, like a cruel refrain echoing through my childhood. He's too soft to survive in this world. It was almost a punchline in family conversations, but it was anything but funny to me. My parents never stood up for me against him. Maybe they thought he was right. Maybe they were just too tired to fight. All I knew was that I was the kid who cried when bullied at school, who stayed quiet when the world got too loud, who preferred books and quiet corners over shouting matches and rough games. Soft. Weak. Not cut out for the harsh realities that seemed to shape everyone else's lives. My uncle was everything I wasn't. Loud, brash, and ruthless. A man who thrived on power and control, always the center of attention at family dinners. The one who made decisions without asking for advice. He had that smug, almost predatory smile, like he knew something nobody else did. He believed that kindness was a weakness, and he made sure everyone around him knew it. For years, I carried his words like a weight, a label that stuck no matter how much I tried to prove otherwise. I was the quiet kid who studied hard, worked odd jobs to help my family, and dreamed of a future far away from his shadow. But the world he thrived in, cutthroat, deceptive, and unrelenting, felt like a completely different planet. It wasn't until recently that the universe handed me an unexpected turn of fate that would bring our worlds crashing together again in the most unimaginable way. Last year, I graduated from law school, barely scraping by but determined to make something of myself. I landed a job as a junior legal consultant at a mid-sized firm, working primarily on criminal cases. It was tough work, and the hours were brutal, but I was proud. Every day I told myself, you're not soft. You're stronger than you think. It was like a mantra I needed to survive. Then one morning, my boss called me into his office with a strange look. He slid a file across the desk. The name on it made my heart stop for a moment. My uncle's full name, bold and glaring on the paperwork. Fraud charges, hefty sums involved, and the kicker, he was due for a bail hearing soon, and the firm was assigned to handle his case. I felt a cold rush through me. This was the man who had belittled me, mocked my softness my entire life. The same man who had made my parents doubt me, question my ability to thrive. And now, I was expected to advise the judge on whether he should be granted bail. The irony was crushing. The next few days were a blur of research, case files, and late nights. I pored over every detail, financial records, witness statements, and police reports. The evidence was overwhelming. My uncle had orchestrated a complex scheme that defrauded investors out of millions. He had used fake companies, forged documents, and manipulated people's trust like it was a game. I sat in the dark hours of the night, reading through the statements, trying to suppress the mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, and something colder, like vindication. I had always suspected he was dangerous, but seeing it spelled out on paper was different. This wasn't just arrogance or bullying anymore. This was deliberate, calculated harm. I knew what I had to do. The day of the bail hearing came quickly. I dressed carefully, trying to steady my nerves. My boss gave me a nod of encouragement, but I could tell he expected me to handle this professionally, no personal feelings. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffling of papers and murmurs from the gallery. My uncle sat at the defendant's table, his usual confident smirk replaced by a look of discomfort. He caught my eye for a brief second, and I swear I saw a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe fear, but it disappeared quickly. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, clearing my throat. The judge looked at me expectantly, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me, "I have reviewed all the evidence pertaining to this case. The defendant has been charged with extensive financial fraud that has harmed numerous innocent people. His actions demonstrate not only a blatant disregard for the law, but also for the well-being of others." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "Furthermore," I continued, "based on the nature of the crimes and the risk of flight, I must recommend that bail be denied. This man is a danger to society. His manipulation and deceit go beyond mere criminal activity. They reflect a character that believes itself above accountability." I saw my uncle shift uncomfortably in his seat. I pressed on. "Your Honor, I must also add a personal observation. This individual has repeatedly demonstrated an attitude that undermines those he deems soft people like me and many others. He once said to my family that soft people can't survive in this world. I submit to you, Your Honor, that it is people like him who pose the real danger. The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned back, processing. My uncle's lawyer opened his mouth to object, but the judge raised a hand. I appreciate your candor, the judge said. We will take this recommendation seriously. As I sat down, the tension in the room was palpable. I caught my uncle's eye again. This time, no smirk, just a hollow stare. Walking out of the courtroom that day, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that justice might be served. Sadness for what had been lost, family, trust, and years wasted under his shadow. That night, I called my parents. The conversation was hard. They admitted they had tried to protect me from the toxic influence, but had felt powerless against his dominance. They apologized, genuinely, and said they were proud of how far I had come. For the first time, I felt seen. The experience changed me. It wasn't just about winning a case or proving a point. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about showing myself and the world that being soft wasn't a weakness. It was strength. I started to volunteer, helping victims of financial crimes and supporting those who had been manipulated by people like my uncle. I realized that compassion and resilience could coexist. And as for my uncle, the trial was ongoing, but for now, he remained behind bars, stripped of his freedom and influence. The man who once said I was too soft to survive had underestimated one thing, that soft people don't just survive. Sometimes, they become the ones who hold others accountable. After that day in court, the silence that followed was deafening. Walking out of the building, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and resolve. It was one of the most intense moments of my life. I had just faced a man who'd haunted my childhood in the harshest way possible, and I had the power, at least for now, to hold him accountable. But the fight wasn't over. The trial was just beginning, and the media had already started sniffing around. My uncle's case was becoming a local headline: fraud, family betrayal, the dramatic courtroom showdown. People whispered about it at work, and some of my colleagues tried to tiptoe around the subject. I could feel their eyes on me, unsure whether to ask, pity, or judge. I tried to keep my professional and personal lives separate, but it was impossible. Every phone call, every case I worked on, every piece of paper on my desk reminded me why I was here, to make sure no one else suffered the way I had. That evening, I sat alone in my small apartment, staring at the blank screen of my laptop. I was exhausted but couldn't sleep. The memories I thought I had buried deep came rushing back. The nights I cried after my uncle's taunts, the times I felt invisible to my own family, the sting of feeling too soft in a world that rewarded toughness. I pulled out an old notebook, the one I'd kept since high school, filled with scribbled dreams and sketches of a different life. I read through my own words. I want to be someone who protects others, someone who stands up. Back then, I had no idea what that really meant. Now I did. The next day, I went to work early, determined to throw myself into something positive. I met with a local charity that helped victims of fraud and financial abuse. Volunteering with them felt like the first real step toward healing. I listened to stories of people who lost their savings, their homes, their dignity. People who had trusted someone only to be betrayed. Each story cut deep, but it also fueled my determination. Over the weeks, I became more involved in the case. I spent hours preparing evidence, coordinating with prosecutors, and meeting witnesses. Each meeting was a reminder of the cost of greed and deception and how far my uncle had fallen. But amidst the chaos, I found moments of unexpected kindness. One day, a witness, an elderly woman who had been swindled out of her life savings, thanked me with tears in her eyes. "You're doing more than just being a lawyer," she said. "You're giving us hope." Her words struck a chord. Back at work, the dynamic had shifted. I wasn't just the quiet kid anymore. I was someone who stood up, even when it was uncomfortable or risky. But not everyone was happy about it. Some colleagues whispered behind my back, and rumors circulated that I was letting my personal feelings cloud my judgment. My boss warned me to stay professional and objective, but how could I separate the two when the defendant was family? One afternoon, my uncle's lawyer approached me after a meeting. "You're passionate," he said, with a cold smile. "But passion isn't evidence. Don't let it blind you." I looked him in the eye. "I'm not blinded. I'm just not afraid to see the truth." That night, I finally broke down. I called my mom, my voice shaking as I told her how much this all hurt. She cried too, admitting she wished she had protected me better. We talked for hours, healing old wounds, rebuilding trust. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was my chance to rewrite the narrative my uncle had tried to control for so long. Over the next few months, the trial unfolded like a storm. My uncle's arrogance faded as the evidence mounted. Witnesses testified about his schemes, the lies he told, the lives he shattered. I sat in the courtroom every day, taking notes, supporting the prosecution. Sometimes, my eyes would wander to him, the man who had belittled me, who had declared me too soft. Now, he was the one on trial, vulnerable and exposed. One afternoon, during a recess, I was approached by one of the junior lawyers in the firm. "You've handled this case with incredible professionalism," she said quietly. "I know it's personal, but you never let that get in the way." Her words meant more than she probably realized. I realized I had grown stronger, not in spite of my softness, but because of it. Compassion had given me resilience. Vulnerability had made me brave. The verdict came on a rainy day. The courtroom was packed. My parents sat behind me, holding hands. When the judge read the guilty verdict and sentenced my uncle to years in prison, I felt an overwhelming mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that justice had been served. Sorrow for a family broken beyond repair. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to a new normal. I continued my work at the firm but also made time for myself, something I'd rarely done before. I started attending therapy, learning how to process the years of pain and neglect. I reconnected with friends I had distanced myself from, realizing that softness didn't mean isolation. One day, I was asked to speak at a community event about my experience and the importance of standing up against fraud and abuse. Standing in front of the crowd, sharing my story, I felt a strange pride. Not because I had won a legal battle, but because I had reclaimed my voice. My parents stood in the back, tears streaming down their faces. After the speech, they hugged me tightly. "You're not soft," my dad whispered. "You're one of the strongest people I know." And in that moment, I finally believed it. Looking back, I realized my uncle's words had been a challenge, a cruel one, but also a spark. He had underestimated the power of kindness and resilience. Being soft didn't mean I was weak. It meant I cared, I felt deeply, and I was willing to fight for what was right. The world might be harsh, but it's the soft ones who survive, and sometimes they're the ones who change it. After the sentencing, I took 2 weeks off work. Not because I had to, my firm actually offered to keep me on the case longer as part of a victim impact statement project, but because I needed to step away, to breathe, to feel something other than pressure, pain, and the adrenaline of constantly proving I belonged. I flew out to Oregon and stayed with an old college friend who ran a bookstore and lived in a cabin that smelled like cedar and fresh paper. There was no Wi-Fi, spotty cell reception, and a wood-burning stove that took some effort to get going. It was perfect. I spent my mornings walking through the forest trails and my afternoons curled up with books I hadn't read in years. I journaled, cried a little, laughed more than I expected. I even allowed myself to grieve, not just for the uncle I once looked up to, but for the childhood I never really had. A childhood that had been a constant game of pretending I wasn't hurt, wasn't affected, wasn't too soft. One night, my friend Josh and I sat on the porch, watching the trees sway in the wind. "You know," he said, sipping a beer, "I always thought you were the strongest of our group." I laughed. "Because I didn't party?" "No," he said, "because you always showed up. Even when you were going through stuff. You never let it harden you." It stuck with me more than he knew. That was always the fear, right? That the world would chew me up and I'd come out cold, unrecognizable. But here I was, scarred but intact. When I returned to the city, something had shifted. My coworkers looked at me differently. Not with pity, but respect. I wasn't the quiet background guy anymore. I was the one who had gone through hell and come back clearer, sharper, grounded. A few months passed. The legal world moved fast, and I stayed busy. My uncle's case became a case study in ethics seminars, and someone even reached out asking if I'd speak at a local law school. I declined. Public speaking still made my chest tighten, but it was nice to be asked. One afternoon, I got an email from a woman named Celia, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She used to be my uncle's assistant at his firm before everything fell apart. Her message was simple. "I don't know if you remember me, but I just wanted to say thank you. You don't know how many of us were scared to speak up until you did." I replied, and we ended up meeting for coffee. She told me things I hadn't known, how he threatened staff who questioned his decisions, manipulated accounts, and how many people felt trapped by his charm and intimidation. My stomach turned. It was worse than I thought. But it also reminded me that justice mattered, even when it came slowly. At home, I finally redecorated my apartment. Got rid of the old desk I'd inherited from my uncle, the one I used in law school. I replaced it with a lighter, Scandinavian-style table I'd always wanted but felt guilty splurging on. A small thing, but symbolic. One Saturday, my mom called. "We're planning a dinner," she said. "Just the family. We want you there." My stomach nodded. Family gatherings were complicated. "Will he be there?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No," she said gently. "He's not a part of this family anymore." So I went. It was awkward at first. My aunts barely met my eyes, and my cousins didn't know what to say, but then someone made a dumb joke about my dad's cooking, and the room cracked open. Laughter, nostalgia, even hugs. Healing comes in strange shapes. That night, as we sat on the patio under warm string lights, my mom handed me something wrapped in old cloth. "It's from your grandfather," she said. "He left it for you in his will, but we didn't give it to you back then. Thought you were too young." Inside was a pocket watch, engraved with the words, "The strongest steel is forged in fire." I stared at it for a long time. I never knew my grandfather well. He died when I was a kid. But something about that inscription hit me hard. I slept with it on my nightstand after that. Weeks passed, then months. My uncle appealed the decision, of course he did, but the judge denied it. His sentence stood. Meanwhile, I took on more cases focused on fraud victims. My reputation in the firm grew, and I was promoted to a new internal role helping design a support program for employees who dealt with high-stress or emotionally charged cases. One day, the head partner pulled me into his office. I braced myself. Old habits die hard. But he smiled. "I want to talk to you about mentorship," he said. "We've got a few new recruits who need a guide." "Thought of you." I was floored. "I'm not sure I'm the right guy," I said, uncertain. "You are," he replied, "because you know what it means to walk through fire and not let it consume you." It took a moment to sink in. I was becoming the person I once needed. Taking on the mentorship role was something I never expected to say yes to, but I did. Not out of ambition, but because I remembered what it felt like to be 24 and unsure of everything. Fresh out of law school, overworked, and underestimated. If I could be the calm voice in the storm for someone else, that felt like something worth doing. My first mentee was a young guy named Adam. Eager, quiet, and clearly nervous on his first day. He reminded me so much of myself it was uncanny. Glasses slightly crooked, tie a bit too tight, constantly fidgeting with his notes. I could tell he was smart, but unsure of his place. During our first one-on-one, he stammered through a question about court procedures, then apologized 3 times for probably wasting my time. I stopped him mid-sentence. "Adam," I said, "when I started here, I was terrified every time I opened my mouth. You're not wasting my time. You're building your confidence. That's what this stage is for." He looked up like I'd just spoken a foreign language no one had offered him before. A small smile crept across his face. "Okay," he said. "Thanks." Over the next few weeks, we met often. He shadowed me on cases, asked thoughtful questions, and slowly began to find his rhythm. Watching him grow gave me an unexpected sense of pride, like watching your younger self finally getting the support you wish you'd had. One afternoon, after a long strategy meeting, Adam asked me quietly, "How did you get so calm in front of people?" I almost laughed. "Me? Calm?" But I thought for a second and replied, "It wasn't always like that. I used to shake before meetings. I'd rehearse entire sentences in my head before saying them. But then I realized, people aren't expecting you to be perfect. They're just hoping you know who you are." That night, I went home and thought about how far I'd come. The angry, quiet kid who was told he wouldn't make it. The soft-spoken intern. The man who stood in court, across from his own blood, and found his voice. My phone buzzed. A message from my father. "Saw the article in the legal bulletin. Proud of you, son." Short. Simple. But it knocked the wind out of me in the best way. My father was never a man of many words. But this was more than I'd gotten in years. I sat there holding the phone like it might disappear if I blinked. Then I replied, "Thanks, Dad. Means more than you know." The next day at work, the HR director asked if I'd be willing to speak on a panel for Mental Health Awareness Week. "Your story's powerful," she said, "and a lot of younger staff would benefit from it." At first, I hesitated. The idea of speaking publicly about my trauma still made my skin crawl. But then I thought of Adam, of the interns, of the quiet ones in the back who needed to hear that strength doesn't have to look like aggression or arrogance. So I said yes. The day of the panel, I sat backstage, heart pounding. I'd written down bullet points, but as I stood up and faced the crowd, I barely looked at them. I just spoke. I talked about the weight of expectations, about being labeled too sensitive or too soft in a field that rewarded ruthlessness, about my uncle, the courtroom, the betrayal, and the long, slow road to rebuilding not just my career, but my sense of self. When I finished, the room was quiet for a second. Then came the applause. Not loud or dramatic, but steady, real. Afterward, people came up to thank me. One woman, probably in her 50s, said, "I've been in this field for decades, and I've never heard anyone talk about this. You have no idea how important it was to hear." I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was anxious, but because I felt awake in a way I hadn't in years. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was making a mark. A few days later, I was invited to a university roundtable with law students. One of them asked, "What's the hardest thing you've ever done?" I thought about that for a while. "Honestly," I said, "letting go of the version of myself who thought he had to be someone else to succeed. The hardest thing was learning that being soft doesn't mean being weak. It means being human, and choosing not to become cruel in a cruel world. That's its own kind of strength." That answer made its way into a few blogs. I got invited to write an op-ed. Suddenly, I wasn't just the quiet lawyer who helped convict his uncle. I was someone people wanted to listen to. But fame, even in a niche legal way, wasn't what I was chasing. I just wanted to matter. One evening, Adam knocked on my office door. He looked nervous again. "I got offered a job," he said. "Different firm. Big promotion. More responsibility." I smiled. "That's amazing, Adam." He looked down. "I wouldn't even have thought I was good enough if it weren't for you." I walked over and patted his shoulder. "You were always good enough. You just needed to believe it." That night, I left the office late and walked home under the city lights. I passed by a coffee shop I used to sit in during law school, broke and tired, wondering if I'd ever get a real case, a real win, a real moment. And here I was, still soft, still standing, still growing, and maybe, just maybe, turning into someone who could help others believe in themselves too. About a year after the sentencing, I was asked to attend a formal recognition dinner. It was hosted by the city's Ethics and Accountability Council, kind of a small thing in the bigger picture, but for me, it felt like a milestone. They were honoring professionals who had exposed corruption or abuse of power in high-profile cases. I'd made the list. I almost didn't go. The idea of standing on a stage, being clapped for, still didn't sit easily with me. Recognition had never been what I was chasing. But my therapist, who'd been with me through every step of this journey, said something that stuck. "It's not just about you. Sometimes showing your face is about letting others know they can have one, too." So I went, bought a suit that actually fit, polished my shoes, practiced my smile in the mirror. I walked into the venue feeling more like a guest at someone else's party than a recipient. But when the host mentioned my name, when he spoke about a young man who stood up against family pressure, personal pain, and institutional intimidation, something inside me thawed. I walked up, accepted the plaque, and gave a short, careful speech. Afterward, a woman about my mother's age came up to me. Her eyes were rimmed red, mascara a little smudged. "My daughter worked at his firm," she said. "She couldn't sleep for a year after. Thought it was her fault she didn't say something sooner." You gave her back her voice. I didn't know what to say, just held her hand for a moment and nodded. That was enough. But the moment that truly broke me, healed me, maybe came a month later. I was at my office, sipping lukewarm coffee and going over documents, when the front desk buzzed. "There's a man here asking for you," the receptionist said. "Says his name is Jonah Green. He's your uncle." I felt like someone had poured ice down my spine. "Tell him I'm not available," I said, without hesitation. A pause. "He asked me to give you this," she added. "Left it with security. Didn't stay." It was an envelope. No return address. Inside, a short, handwritten note and a newspaper clipping from years ago, an article I wrote for my college paper titled, "Why Soft Doesn't Mean Weak." The note read, "I read this again, recently. I don't expect forgiveness. But I see now that I was wrong. About you. About everything. Maybe if I had been a little softer, I wouldn't have broken everything I touched. You didn't just survive. You became someone I never could. Jay." I sat there staring at it for what felt like hours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just folded the note and put it in the back of my desk drawer. Closure doesn't always come with a door slamming shut. Sometimes, it's just a quiet recognition that you've moved on while someone else is still standing in the ashes of who they were. After that, life settled, but in the best way. I started writing more. Essays about emotional resilience, vulnerability, and leadership, the pressures of being a quiet man in a loud profession. Some of them were published in legal journals. One even got picked up by a mental health organization, and they asked me to record a podcast episode. I was hesitant, but the emails from strangers, law students, burned out junior lawyers, people who had family like mine, made it worth it. One note stood out. Your story made me realize I've been punishing myself for not being hard enough. But maybe being soft and honest is my actual strength. Thank you. That one, I printed out and pinned behind my desk. Eventually, I opened my own consulting firm focused on ethics compliance and emotional wellness in high-performance legal environments. It was niche. It wasn't the most profitable route, but it made sense for me. The first person I hired? Adam. He'd left his other job and wanted something with meaning. Now he leads our mentorship arm. We even started a scholarship in my grandfather's name, the Forged in Fire Fund, for first-generation law students. Watching them come through the doors, nervous and eager, felt like watching the younger version of myself get a second chance again and again. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror before work and caught my reflection in a way I hadn't in years. Still soft, still quiet, but my spine was straight, my gaze steady. I finally liked the man looking back at me. I got an email that same afternoon from a nonprofit asking if I'd be open to being on their board. When I looked at the list of other board members, I saw names of people I used to look up to. Now they wanted me beside them. And the next weekend, at a dinner with some of those same people, one of them leaned over and said, "You're known as the guy who didn't just burn bridges, but built better ones in their place." It made me smile. Because yes, I'd once been the kid everyone underestimated. Yes, I'd once been the nephew who cried too easily, who was told he wouldn't last in a courtroom, who flinched at his uncle's every word. But now I was the man who had learned to wield softness like a sword. And when people said, "You're too soft for this world," I just smiled and thought, funny, I'm still here. And I'm the one writing the rules now.